To perform this work, you will need to first safely raise and support the vehicle as well as remove the wheels. For additional assistance with those tasks, please follow the link provided at the end of this video. Let's start on the front. A large portion of the front suspension is covered by a large plastic tray. Remove this tray prior to working on the front suspension. The tray is held on with small metal clips that need to be pried off and also a few plastic nuts that need to be removed. Lower right picture. The lower left shows the two cross braces that need to be loosened and moved out of the way if you are removing the sway bar. Install the outer tie rod is started by holding the inner ball joint with a T30 torque driver and turning the nut. Once the nut is off, then you can use a pickle fork tool to pop the ball joint out of the wheel carrier. The steering rods are removed in a similar manner to the ball joints. A pickle fork or a ball joint tool is essential for popping the tie rod ends out of the end of the strut. Proceed cautiously as the rubber boot can easily be damaged when you remove the tie rod end. However, if you are replacing the tie rod end anyways, this shouldn't be a concern. Before you install the new tie rods, you should attempt to get each one as close as possible in length to the original. The distance between the green arrows should be the same. Place them on your bench and compare the lengths and mark the position of the tie rod end using some white correction fluid, small white arrow. Adjust the new ones as necessary to the lengths of the old ones. This will enable you to get as close as possible to the toe-in alignment adjustment. You will still need to take the car in for an alignment, but you want to get as close as possible to minimize tire wear while you are driving it to the alignment shop. Shown here are several steps in the tie rod installation process. A good tool I've found to remove the tie rod ends is a plumber's wrench. I've had good luck removing the tie rod ends with this tool, especially when access to the area is tight, as it is on the Boxster. New tie rods are screwed into the ends of the steering rack. Although there is a torque specification for this, it's nearly impossible to measure without the use of a special installation tool. You can also add some blue Loctite to the end. Pre-fit the boot and the clamps and slide them onto the tie rod. It's an understatement to say the OEM clamps are a bit difficult to work with. I believe they are meant to be used during the car's assembly when good access can be had to all areas, so instead I typically use standard hose clamps, which I feel are better constructed and easier to install. On just about every other car I've worked on, there are locking tabs that act as a stopgap measure to prevent the tie rods from backing out of the steering rack. Surprisingly, the Boxster lacks these, so I prefer to apply some blue Loctite or Permatech thread locker compound to ensure the tie rods stay in place. Carefully clean out the inside of the steering rack prior to screwing on the rods with the thread locker applied to the threads. The front control arm, white arrow, is attached to the boomerang-shaped plate, orange arrow, that is bolted to the bottom of the chassis. In order to loosen the control arm connection and remove the sway bar bushing, green arrow, remove the two bolts on either side of the sway bar bushing, yellow arrows, and the large bolt at the rear, red arrow. You do not need to remove the bolt indicated by the light blue arrow. Finally, rotate the boomerang out of the way. The drop links, green arrow, may present a challenge to remove as the ball joint on the top of the drop link may spin when you try to remove the outer nut. If this happens, you will need to use a thin wrench, yellow arrow, to hold the ball joint in place while you loosen the nut. You can purchase a set of wrenches that are specifically designed to fit into places where normal thick wrenches will not. They're available in the tool section at Pelican. They are typically about 1/8 of an inch thick and are a very useful tool to add to your kit. Solid sway bar bushings are essential to good handling. To perform a complete renewal of the front suspension, you should replace the sway bar bushings and drop links as well. The bushings have a slit down the center, so you can easily pry them off of the sway bar. Shown here is the top view of the front suspension. Since the front shock has been removed, the assembly must be supported by the floor jack, blue arrow. The brake caliper is tied up and hung from a wire on the left, purple arrow. The tie rod is connected to the wheel carrier as shown by the orange arrow. When removing the shocks, you need to loosen the main bolt that attaches the wishbone to the chassis, yellow arrow. Do not remove it, only loosen it, as this will give you enough free play to drop the assembly down and remove the front shock. The control arm is connected to the center of the wishbone, red arrow, and the boomerang-shaped plate shown previously. Finally, this photo also shows the sway bar, white arrow, which has been disconnected from the drop links. This photo shows the main components of the front suspension on the Boxster. This is a wishbone and supports the wheel carrier, which wraps around the shock and contains the wheel bearing. The control arm constrains the movement of the wishbone so that it travels in a mostly up and down manner. And C, the inner tie rod attaches to the steering rack and is matted with the outer tie rod. Changing the effective length of the tie rod assembly changes the toe-in alignment. The outer tie rod attaches to the wheel carrier and transmits steering inputs from the rack to the carrier. Although this isn't a hugely common problem, the steering column rubber couplings tend to age and wear out on the cars. At this time, the only way to replace a coupling is to replace the entire steering column at a lot of money. There's a night and day difference between a new and used rack. The insert photo shows a genuine Porsche rebuilt power steering rack and pinion assembly. If the rack wears out, then you will find that your steering will be sloppy. Also common are leaky racks that deposit power steering fluid on the floor of your garage. Be aware though, sometimes it may only be the power steering lines that are leaking and need to be replaced, not the expensive rack. The common leakage points for the rack is out the ends. If you cut open your tie rod boot and a lot of power steering fluid starts flowing out, then chances are that the seals in the end of the rack are worn and needs to be replaced or rebuilt. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out another video in this series.